explanation. Still, as long as you can hear, the dirt's only superficial. Official? Just a little, that means. Jane dragged her daughter to the table and inserted her legs into a high chair. Only lately had Emma graduated to the dignity of dining with the rest of the family, and she was, as Paradine remarked, all eaten up with pride by the prospect. Only babies spilled food, Emma had been told, and as a result she took such painstaking care in conveying her spoon to her mouth that Paradine got the jitters whenever he watched. A conveyor belt would be the thing for Emma, he suggested, pulling out a chair for Jane. Small buckets of spinach arriving at her face at stated intervals. Dinner proceeded uneventfully until Paradine happened to glance at Scott's plate. Hello there, sick? Been stuffing yourself at lunch? Scott thoughtfully examined the food still left before him. I've had all I need, Dad, he explained. You usually eat all you can hold and a great deal more, Paradine said. I know growing boys need several tons of foodstuff a day, but you're below par today. Feel okay? Mm-hmm. Honest, I've had all I need. All you want? Sure, I eat different. Something they taught you at school? Jane inquired. Scott shook his head solemnly. Nobody taught me. I found it up myself. I use spit. Try again, Paradine suggested. It's the wrong word. Saliva, Uh-huh. More pepsin. Is there pepsin in the salivary juices, Jane? I forgot. There's poison in mine, Jane remarked. Rosalie's left lumps in the mashed potatoes again. But Paradine was interested. You mean you're getting everything possible out of your food? No wastage and eating less? Scott thought that over. I guess so. It's not just that saliva. I sort of measure how much to put in my mouth at once and what stuff to mix up. I don't know. I just do it. Said Paradine, making a note to check up later. Rather revolutionary idea. Kids often get screwy notions, but this one might not be so far off the beam. He pursed his lips. Eventually, I suppose, people will eat quite differently. I mean, the way they eat, as well as what. What they eat, I mean. Jane, our son shows signs of becoming a genius. Oh? It's a rather good point in dietetics he just made. Did you figure it out yourself, Scott? Sure, the boy said, and really believed it. Where'd you get the idea? Scott wriggled. I don't know. It doesn't mean much, I guess. Paradine was unreasonably disappointed. But surely... Spit! Emma shrieked, overcome by a sudden fit of badness. Spit! And she attempted to demonstrate, but succeeded only in dribbling into her bib. With a resigned air, Jane rescued and reproved her daughter, while Paradine eyed Scott with rather puzzled interest. It was not till after dinner in the living room that anything further happened. Any homework? No, Scott said, flushing guiltily. To cover his embarrassment, he took from his pocket a gadget he had found in the box and began to unfold it. The result resembled a tesseract, strung with beads. Paradine didn't see it at first, but Emma did. She wanted to play with it. No, lay off, slug, Scott ordered. You can watch me. He fumbled with the beads, making soft, interested noises. Emma extended a fat forefinger and yelped. Scotty, Paradine said warningly. I didn't hurt her. Bit me. It did. Emma mourned. Paradine looked up. He frowned, staring. What in... Is that an abacus? He asked. Let's see it, please. Somewhat unwillingly, Scott brought the gadget across to his father's chair. Paradine blinked. The abacus, unfolded, was more than a foot square, composed of thin, rigid wires that interlocked here and there. On the wires, the colored beads were strung. They could be slid back and forth and from one support to another, even at the points of jointure. But a pierced bead couldn't cross interlocking wires, so apparently they weren't pierced. Paradine looked closer. Each small sphere had a deep groove running around it so that it could be revolved and slid along the wire at the same time. Paradine tried to pull one free. It clung as though magnetically. Iron? It looked more like plastic. The framework itself, Paradine wasn't a mathematician, but the angles formed by the wires were vaguely shocking in their ridiculous lack of Euclidean logic. They were a maze. Perhaps that's what the gadget was, a puzzle. Where'd you get this? Uncle Harry gave it to me, Scott said on the spur of the moment, last Sunday when he came over. Uncle Harry was out of town, a circumstance Scott well knew. At the age of 7, a boy soon learns that the vagaries of adults follow a certain definite pattern, and that they are fussy about the donors of gifts. Moreover, Uncle Harry would not return for several weeks. The expiration of that period was unimaginable to Scott, or at least the fact that his lie would ultimately be discovered meant less to him than the advantages of being allowed to keep the toy. Paradine found himself growing slightly confused as he attempted to manipulate the beads. The angles were vaguely illogical. It was like a puzzle. This red bead, if slid along this wire to that junction, should reach there, but it didn't. A maze. Odd, but no doubt instructive. Paradine had a well-founded feeling that he'd have no patience with this thing himself. Scott did, however, retiring to a corner and sliding beads around with much fumbling and grunting. The beads did sting when Scott chose the wrong ones or tried to slide them in the wrong direction. At last, he crowed exultantly, I did it, Dad! What? Let's see. The device looked exactly the same to Paradine, but Scott pointed and beamed. I made it disappear. It's still there. The blue bead, it's gone now. Paradine didn't believe that, so he merely snorted. Scott puzzled over the framework again. He experimented. This time there were no shocks, even slight. The abacus had shown him the correct method. Now it was up to him to do it on his own. The bizarre angles of the wire seemed a little less confusing now. Somehow, it was a most instructive toy. It worked, Scott thought, rather like the crystal cube. Reminded of that gadget, he took it from his pocket and relinquished the abacus to Emma, who was struck dumb with joy. She fell to work sliding the beads, this time without protesting against the shocks, which indeed were very minor, and being imitative, she managed to make a bead disappear almost as quickly as had Scott. The blue bead reappeared, but Scott didn't notice. He had forethoughtfully retired into an angle of the Chesterfield and an overstuffed chair, and amused himself with the cube. There were the little people inside the thing. Tiny mannequins, much enlarged by the magnifying properties of the crystal. They moved all right. They built a house. It caught fire with realistic-seeming flames, and the little people stood by waiting. Scott puffed urgently. Put it out. But nothing happened. Where was the queer fire engine with the revolving arms that had appeared before? Here it was. It came sailing into the picture and stopped. Scott urged it on. This was fun. The little people really did what Scott told them inside of his head. If he made a mistake, they waited till he found the right way. They even posed new problems for him. The cube, too, was a most instructive toy. It was teaching Scott with alarming rapidity and teaching him very entertainingly. But it gave him no really new knowledge as yet. He wasn't ready. Later... Meanwhile, in the adjoining room, Emma was sliding the beads to and fro in the abacus. The motions didn't seem so strange now. Even when the beads vanished, she could almost follow the new direction. Almost. Scott panted, staring into the crystal cube, and mentally directing with many false starts the building of a structure somewhat more complicated than the one which had been destroyed by fire. He, too, was learning, being conditioned. Paradine's mistake from a completely anthropomorphic standpoint was that he didn't get rid of the toys instantly. He did not realize their significance, and by the time he did, the progression of circumstances had gotten well underway. Uncle Harry remained out of town, so Paradine couldn't check with him. Too, the midterm exams were on, which meant arduous mental effort and complete exhaustion at night, and Jane was slightly ill for a week or so. Emma and Scott had free rein with the toys. "What," Scott asked his father one evening, "is a wave, Dad?" "Wave?" He hesitated. No, I don't think so. Isn't wave right?" "A wave is Scott for web, that's it?" I don't see how," Scott muttered, and wandered off scowling to amuse himself with the abacus. He was able to handle it quite deftly now. But with the instinct of children for avoiding interruption, he and Emma usually played with the toys in private. Not obviously, of course. But the more intricate experiments were never performed under the eyes of an adult. Scott was learning fast. What he now saw in the crystal cube had little relationship to the original simple problems, but they were fascinatingly technical. Had Scott realized that his education was being guided and supervised, though merely mechanically, he would probably have lost interest. As it was, his initiative was never quashed. Abacus, cube, and other toys the children found in the box. Neither Paradine nor Jane guessed how much of an effect the contents of the time machine were having on the kids. How could they? Youngsters are instinctive dramatists for purposes of self-protection. They have not yet fitted themselves to the exigencies, to them partially inexplicable, of a mature world. Moreover, their lives are complicated by human variables. They are told by one person that playing in the mud is permissible, but but that in their excavations they must not uproot flowers or small trees. Another adult vetoes mud per se. The 10 Commandments are not carved on stone, they vary. And children are helplessly dependent on the caprice of those who give them birth and feed and clothe them, and tyrannize. The young animal does not resent that benevolent tyranny, for it is an essential part of nature. He is, however, an individualist, and maintains his integrity by a subtle, passive fight. From the standpoint of logic, a child is rather horribly perfect. A baby must even be more perfect, but so alien to an adult that only superficial standards of comparison apply. The thought processes of an infant are completely unimaginable, but babies think even before birth. In the womb, they move and sleep, not entirely through instinct. We are conditioned to react rather peculiarly to the idea that a nearly viable embryo may think. We are surprised, shocked into laughter, and repelled.